Hi. In the second session, I'm going to focus on what moving methodologies mean in practice. And what I'd like to start with is the idea of walking alone, of consciously losing oneself. So walking alone, as Rebecca Solnit has said, I mentioned her in the last session, referencing Walter Benjamin, the idea is consciously, intentionally losing oneself, and that this can help make a field site known to oneself. It can bring it to life, it can reveal some of its secrets, and perhaps even, as I said earlier, reveal a question if you haven't already got one. It is very different from passing through a space in a vehicle, that kind of fast moving through, treating a place merely as backdrop, as an on-the-way place, to a more fixed location where you might do an interview or some other kind of observation. So clearly it's something quite special and quite different. This idea of openness that I spoke about before with Rebecca Solnit's idea, that's absolutely part of it. But at the same time, one simultaneously requires conscious focus. It may not sound like it makes sense, but it's not as contradictory as it sounds. So the idea is to, of course, go openly, walk openly, but at the same time keep this conscious focus. So it means being alert through all one's senses to sights, sounds, smells, the energies and the feelings of a particular place, of its surroundings. It means paying attention to the textures, the colors of surfaces that you see, those things that you see, but also paying attention to the composition and densities of the spaces that you pass through in terms of people, buildings, infrastructure, perhaps services. And it also means paying attention to what might seem permanent as opposed to what seems temporary, what is working and functional and what is broken, what is fixed in place and what's in motion. These are all parts of, the attention and the gathering of data by using this walking method. And generally also paying attention to where there are hubs of encounter and vibrancy on the one hand, and spaces of emptiness and desolation on the other, but also how these are juxtaposed besides one another. Next, I'd like to talk about the idea of walking with others, going along with others. So walking with others, whether this is casual or deliberate, selectively or spontaneously moving together with others, it helps to reveal key sites or processes of historical significance, of social, political, economic, cultural, or even emotional significance, and getting a sense of the roles that these things play in people's lives, but also in the life of the city itself. So this idea of walking with others, there are many different ways. There are religious ceremonies, there are political demonstrations, there are places of remembering, of places of discovery, of memorializing, of remembering, and these are all different kinds of spaces and experiences of spaces to pay attention, and that other people, as they move through them, reflect on, relate to, remember and speak about. So one of the advantages of going along with others as opposed to walking alone or more sedentary methods, as I talked about in the last session, is that individuals and groups bring to their own vantage points in space, in place, already established positionalities, experiences, knowledges, and interests that you can tap into, that get revealed. So you get this experience of simultaneous mappings of urban space through going along with others. None is right, none is wrong of these versions of urban reflection and mapping. It's just a matter of paying attention to them and seeing where this fits into what your own research interest and your research question is. And as Kussenbach tells us, by going along with others as opposed to being in a sedentary setting, this helps reveal peripheral layers of meaning, as she calls it, things that don't easily or consciously surface when sitting somewhere, when standing in one place, but by moving, phenomenologically moving through, experiencing space, reflecting, revealing, embodying, memorying, these things do get, come out, and you can gather these as data. So whether you tag along naturally, in the natural go along as Kusenbach talks about, unobtrusively observing and just following along, or purposively going along, being more actively present, asking questions, interviewing, moving methodologies bring much to the surface that may be taken for granted or otherwise be hidden within the mundane dynamics of everyday life. So they're methods that offer insights into the local physical and social architectures that may not be as available and accessible through other kinds of methods. Just to give an indication again of different kinds of going alongs, as I've mentioned in the previous mini lecture, Kusenbach talks about this natural going along, this accompanying someone through the course of their regular everyday movements. It's a sort of, as if anything is purely natural, but just moving along in what is a regular day. So she's very interested in that. She has, in the course of her research, gives an example of an 80-year-old man in his regular walking exercises, where he walks along, it's his regular exercise, but he buys a lottery ticket, and in that practice reveals his dreams for a future life. On the other hand, she gives an example of a woman in her 50s who makes the choice to walk rather than drive in her neighborhood. Even though she can afford to drive, she has a car. But this is her way of asserting her right to freedom of movement rather than being imprisoned by fear of the streets. So these are just some of the ways in which one learns about what it means to be in a city, experience it, reflect on it, and what it says about how one reflects on one's own life and one's own consciousness. In terms of purposive go-alongs, this means accompanying informants, an individual or a group of individuals, in order to observe a particular event or process. Now, this is when you already have an idea of something you're trying to observe and explain and analyze. So this could be political demonstrations, it could be an election campaign, a religious parade, or witnessing certain kinds of institutional practices, such as the work of an ambulance driver, for example, or the daily work of urban policing. And I've taken the example of Julia Hornberger. She's a South Africa-based researcher, anthropologist, and in a 2004 article, which is called My Police, Your Police, she goes along with South African police men and women on their daily patrols, or in fact nightly patrols, and gets a glimpse into the sort of workings of inner city policing in Johannesburg in South Africa. And through this ethnographic go-along method, she's able to uncover the complex and unexpectedly shifting power relations between police, victims, and criminals in the dense social architecture of the city. And we get to witness through this the layers of connectedness and disconnectedness between various actors in this sort of justice and policing space, and the negotiations and around protection, privilege, and payback in these relations between police, victims, and criminals. And it's a very interesting article. I'd really recommend it, called My Police, Your Police. Now, just the last thing I'd like to address is some of the challenges of recording data while moving. It's not that simple. It's not the same as sitting and recording either, in an interview where you can use your notebooks. There are various practical challenges with regard to these going along methods. So one choice, of course, is to audio record a conversation. That's, with a tape recorder, maybe when you're driving or someone else is driving, if you're doing it through a driving go along. But that can have ethical issues, it can have privacy issues, and people aren't always very comfortable with it. So one has to negotiate whether that's an appropriate method or not, and whether it's feasible or not. Of course, there's the idea of taking notes by hand when you're moving with somebody. it's a little bit awkward when you're walking, when they're walking, you can't stop every few minutes and take a note. But there are various ways of shorthand jotting, including making sketches and various things, and then going away and expanding on those notes afterwards. That's obviously a necessary thing, that you just signal things to yourself very briefly and follow it up with more extensive notes. And then, of course, this and every other form of moving along method would require close attention, close listening, also observation of things, and again, finding a way to keep track of these things, but clearly careful listening, conscious attention to what's around you. There's also the possibility of video footage or taking photographs, but again, that is not only an issue of practicality and having ethical dimensions, but in certain contexts, this is seriously a security issue. You may not be allowed to take footage in a certain kind of environment. So these are things you'd have to think about and play up against each other in the choices that you make. And of course, with video and even recording photographs, there's a kind of performativity that may not come into just the sort of natural conversations as you move along with other people. So the last thing that I'd like to remind you, or all of us, is that no matter what your tools are, no matter what practical tools you use in this moving methodologies, one needs what I would call intersectional eyes to read any physical and social landscape. And so whether you're focusing on buildings or surfaces, what's inside them, what's beneath or behind them, or if you're focusing on movement itself, all of this is affected to different degrees and in different combinations by gender, class, age, sexuality, race, ethnicity, religious or political affiliations. Lots of different dimensions of people's positions and identities. So one has to incorporate these and be conscious of them, knowing that these spaces are always shaped by difference and positionality, including one's own. So finally, as researchers, I'd encourage all of us to pay attention to all these relevant signals as we move both consciously and unconsciously through urban space.